November 1799. Napoleon mounts a coup against the Directory of Revolutionary France, placing himself at the head of a new dictatorship. Ideas of liberty and equality begin to take root throughout the great empires of Europe. The British, Prussian, and Austrian crowns recognize the threat to their rule posed by Bonaparte, and so devise a plan to end this so-called revolution. By the turn of the new year, the royal powers have already begun their schemes. This is the story of the Austrian Empire, Holy Roman Emperor, and their role in the last coalition. Austria was in a weird position while drafting war plans. Napoleon's France was an unpredictable foe with such resurging strength the Habsburgs could never hope to defeat alone. Fortunately, their allies had unique strengths that would shore up their inherent weaknesses. Prussia's land forces were of legendary status, with discipline they could never hope to match. And Britain's economy and navy far outclassed anything they could muster. Austria began an overhaul of the military structure. Cavalry tactics were deemed too costly and outdated, and so were discontinued. The emperor insisted on 2 lines of infantry in every army. For every man that falls, there should be another to take his place. And the artillery and engineer corps were expanded to provide coverage for 3 full army groups. Though they had the tendency to run away all at once in battle, their contributions would prove invaluable. British subsidies kept the army reform project alive for the 5-year build-up period, and as Napoleon proclaimed France as the military hegemony of the world, it seemed clearer to the Austrians that their battles would have to be selected very carefully. All the while, Austrian spies were infiltrating the French institutions, preparing to sabotage recruitment when the time was right. And then we had to remake the save file because the truces were messed up from hegemony, and Slavic was about to go bankrupt. Just before the conflict, the Austrian Empire proclaimed the war against the revolution as a matter of faith for the Catholic people, as Napoleon had forced reform upon the Catholic people of France. As defender of the faith, the Austrian Emperor received many blessings from the Pope himself, raising the morale of the troops and the will to enlist amongst the population. On the 4th of May 1806, Great Britain declared an imperialist war against revolutionary France. Prussia and Austria were still at odds with one another, so this was the only way to have them both fight on the same side. The plan was for the Prussian forces to advance in the north while the Austrian army would sweep through the south. If enough progress was made, the coalition would pincer Napoleon after taking Paris and force his army against the Atlantic. Recognizing the greater threat posed by the Prussians and believing in the southern mountainous defenses, Napoleon struck north. The British and Prussian forces fought numerous simultaneous battles while the Austrians took to the forts in Italy. If Napoleon should send his army south, the Austrians would have already secured defensive terrain and used scorched earth tactics as a buffer while the Prussians recuperated. Fortunately, the Prussians claimed victory in every battle in Hanover, securing their advance forward. Unexpectedly, though, Napoleon did not commit all of his forces to the north. 2 army groups made their way to contest the siege of Mantua, marking the first Austrian-led battle of the conflict. Knowing that France had lost decisively in the north, the emperor had no qualms in committing all of his forces to ensure victory, and so both fronts were secured forward for a time being. However, Austria was still the weakest link of the coalition, and had to be wary of a focused attack from France. That exact worry came true in April of 08. Unbeknownst to Austria, Napoleon had rallied his entire army south and was coming to reclaim the land in Italy. The Austrians stood no chance and had to retreat back to Vienna. The Prussians, however, were making significant gains in the north, approaching Paris with incredible speed. This advance caused the French forces to pull out of Italy just as the emperor recovered his strength. With renewed vigor and the distraction by the Prussian and British forces, Austria was able to push further than ever into the Alps, reaching Savoy and Aix before the French army turned their attention to the region. Beginning a fighting retreat, the Austrian forces used the terrain to their advantage to inflict as many casualties as possible. As of then, the war was nearly half over. Austrian forces had created a buffer of fortifications and scorched earth across Italy, which would definitely slow any advance into Austrian territory should France seek to knock out the weakest link. At the request of the Prussian king, Austrian forces were to relocate to the northern front and leave the garrisons in Italy to defend. France seemed to have given up on the Italian front anyway, and a concentrated strike would allow the coalition to end the war in one swift blow. The Austrian forces arrived in time to participate in the battles of Luxembourg and Juillet, where the French were dealt a crushing blow. Back on the home front, though, Prussia was in shambles. Revolutionaries took to the streets, calling for the end of the war. The Prussian king was forced to make concessions, reducing the armed forces to merely 500,000 men. The revolutionaries in France, hearing of this victory, arrived in droves to help support the war effort. Okay, I don't know how to put this into the roleplay, but basically we gave Habibi 100,000 ducats and 1,000,000 manpower to keep the war going. If we didn't, it probably would have ended a lot sooner, so. Suddenly, the tide of war had changed in France's favor. While the French forces were able to recapture their northern territories, the coalition forces had also spent time replenishing theirs. All at once, the greatest battle of the war had begun. The Battle of Berg, totaling 1.2 million troops on the French side and 900,000 from the coalition, historians agree that the increased coalition artillery and defensive woodland terrain was a significant factor in their victory against the numerical odds. By 1814, the war had stagnated halfway into Belgium, until the Prussian tacticians made a plan to lure the French into an unfavorable position. Starting a facade push into Namur, it was predicted that France would attack disadvantageously into Lune to prevent reinforcements. Afterwards, the Prussian forces would retreat from Namur, and the Battle of Lune would fall to the coalition's victory. The same tactic was attempted in Liège, although this time proved unsuccessful. After reinforcing once more, the coalition attempted another push in the lowlands. The narrowly deciding factor was the Austrian reinforcement at Auvers. The devastating victory saw the French lose twice as many men as the coalition, and already exhausted for manpower, it was no secret that France was nearly broken. The final push into northern France was decisive. By that point, the French troops were unable to halt any coalition advances, and after nearly 12 years of fighting, Paris had finally fallen. What remained was a travesty of French forces, while the Austrian and Prussian armies sieged down the remaining fortifications. On the 6th of November 1819, the War of the Final Coalition had ended with 20 million total casualties. By now, Napoleon was long dead, and revolutionary France humiliated. Thank you for watching. This kind of content is pretty much once in a blue moon. It's not really something I'll usually make, but I'm glad you managed to watch till the end. It also took quite a while to actually edit, so if you'd like to leave a like or something, that would be fantastic. And of course, a special thank you to the people whose names you've already been seeing up on screen, but I've been talking for a while, so I'll just leave you with these recommendations, and I'll see you next time.